Okay, I promise I won't read these word for word, but I know these slides pretty well. So I am a volunteer. I'm actually a co-chair of the faculty Solano, just in here, and I volunteer with LGBTQ tobacco. And together, is this mine? No, that's not my slide. Number one.
David's coming to help us hear you.
But sorry. Together with Bay Area Community Resources, we've been working on Vallejo to pass a couple of important ordinances. Yeah, that was correct. All right. So yes, these are the three organizations. During COVID, I encountered LGBT tobacco on a Zoom with a local Democratic club here in Solano County. And I have been doing this kind of, I've had an interest in this kind of activism for many years. So I found out that Vallejo had among the worst tobacco use sales rates in the entire Bay Area. I was pretty shocked. I was pretty new to Vallejo. And having had a father who was a chimney, the one that I made that clay ashtray for that I told you about, he unfortunately died very young. He was only 50 when he died. He became addicted when he was 13. So I was very personally affected by this. I also found out later that my grandmother, who I never knew, because she also died of her smoking when she was 50. So that's a family tradition I didn't want to carry on. So in my new cities that I just went to later in COVID, I saw on these scary maps that predictably the tobacco industry had targeted the poorest neighborhoods in Vallejo for the highest concentrated. I say tobacco industry, but before we had any ordinances passed in Vallejo, anybody could just open up a tobacco retail establishment there with no parameters. But hopefully you'll get to learn what tobacco retail license is and why it's so important for the future. Because there really isn't any state resources to speak of to go to the city level and to do the enforcement. And unfortunately, there were a lot of opportunistic retailers in Vallejo that took advantage of that vacuum of enforcement. So, here's some empirical evidence on how students in Vallejo were, well, actually, let's see, this one is about students in, this is actually sourced from the Vallejo Unified School District. So these are the percentage of children who, of course, you have to be 21 to buy tobacco products, who said it was relatively easy to get tobacco products in Vallejo in 2021-2022. So the problem was the highest in Solano County for sure as well. And one of the problems also is that they're often food deserts, and when the stores on the corners don't have any fresh food products, and you have all these colorful candy wrapped packages that stay on the shelves for months, so the retailers don't even have to replenish their supply, they can sell these things for really cheap, and people get addicted, and that's how the tobacco industry gets its new customers. So, in 2022, with some of these advocates from the Bay Area Community Resources, we did testify at the City Council, and we actually, in the end, got every single City Council member to approve the smoke-free multi-unit housing ordinance. It was a very strong one. They had passed one in the next door city in Venetia in 2019, I believe. And so it was, Vallejo being the largest city in Solano County, it was wonderful that we were able to pass that. We did have one holdout who seemed to not want to, on city council, who seemed to not want to vote, but we found out that she ended up changing her vote at the last minute, which was nice. So that was a really big win. I was very touched that some of the youth speakers were just there to live their best life, as they put it, and they were very inspiring, I'm sure, instrumental in changing the way the city was the future of the city. Bouncing off of that, we had a Proposition 31 that was on the ballot that passed here in California. That was very helpful. It banned most flavored tobacco. I think that is one of the things that Dr. Mack was referring to when he was saying that we are making some inroads, even with, especially with vapes, because the flavored tobacco is really attractive, obviously, to people, to young people. And several weeks after the ban went into effect, we, a bunch of us here with Dr. Solano, Baylor Community Resources, and LGBT Minus Tobacco, surveyed, well, we very casually entered 25 different retail stores, and we saw that for whatever reason, the retailers were not adhering to the new laws, and we were able to find lots of products that were still being sold. And these are out in the open. It's not like we had to ask. The menthol was one of the flavors that was banned here in California, and instantly the tobacco industry had products that were non-menthol, or they were branded exactly like the menthol products, and some of them even had these little packets that you could squeeze and add some flavor to after the fact, and all these ways to get around. That's why the legislation that Dr. Mack was mentioning is very important, because the State Attorney General is now going to very specifically indicate what products are actually legal to sell, so that there's no question for the tobacco retailers when they're breaking the law. Let's hope. All right. So we went on a kind of a media blitz, if you will. One of the advocates from Baylor Community Resources and I even went on a radio show. There's an FM radio station that's located in Vallejo, and we talked about the TRL and why it was so important to pass. And we also spoke at the Vallejo City Unified School District. The now school board president, John Fox, actually read out a resolution in favor of the tobacco retail license. That's the TRL that was mentioned here. And that also was voted on unanimously by the Vallejo School Board, I'm happy to say. With the momentum of that Proposition 31, we found a champion, Councilman Brenda Zerlini, to City Council. And when we showed him the empirical evidence of what was going on in Solano County and specifically in Vallejo, and particularly the targeting of people of color, people in economically depressed areas, and especially in food deserts, he was very alarmed, even though he's a very pro-business city councilman. But he knew that there were tobacco retailers really taking advantage of our youth. So he was very alarmed, and he became our best champion. And even in all the hairy details of the tobacco retail license, as you'll see, he was the one that really had that North Star, if you will, to make sure that the city council people understood this is about saving lives. This is about not taking another generation of tobacco, of people to tobacco. So, for a very long story, like I said, I'm not going to go through all the different times we had to go back, but it's an arduous process. But we did present to the entire city council. It was actually a rare privilege to have volunteers who were not city employees or otherwise embedded in the city to be able to do a presentation. I have actually not seen any other group do that, but we were given that privilege. It was a little daunting because we were told we would have 30 minutes, and then we sat down in front of the city council and like, can you do it in 5? We managed to get in a lot of the key points, and people pointed out that there were these advocates that had stayed up late on a school night who wanted to speak on this. So we got our message across. So again, we went through a roller coaster. I think this is actually an image from Six Flags in Vallejo. And we went back and forth. We even went back for a second reading, and this is where it got really upsetting. I actually ended up leaving for the night one night when we did the second reading, which is supposed to be a very routine procedure, where after the first reading of the ordinance, which was very complicated, the city council went back and they had a bunch of the retailers that were really upset about the right to transfer their licenses. They ultimately had the city council amend the tobacco retail license and weakened it a bit. The purpose of the tobacco retail license is to make sure that any new tobacco retailers that come to Vallejo, well, first of all, we have about 100, and that is an outrageous number for a city of about 126,000. So the ratio that is recommended, if you will, is 1 to 2,500 people. So to be normal, we should only have about 50 tobacco retailers in Vallejo. And the tobacco retail ordinance, I think there'll be some details on a future slide here, did things, I'll explain what some of the things that it does, but the important thing is that a new retailer can't just move to Vallejo, open up a shop and start selling tobacco when we already have 100 doing that. It's just too easy, and there's too many places where tobacco can be purchased. So, this is what's in the policy. I won't read them all, but I'll read some of the key ones. The sale of no flavored tobacco. Now, that Prop 31 has some exceptions, so unfortunately, not all flavored products were banned. The ordinance that we passed in Vallejo is banning every flavor. And there were some exceptions for expensive cigars and things like that, so now they're all banned. No tobacco discounts. What the tobacco industry does is it tries to target and send people electronic coupons that can be redeemed. So they're hoping that people can get discounts on their tobacco and get addicted and then buy tobacco the rest of their lives. Those are no longer redeemable in Vallejo, thank goodness, because of the tobacco retail license. And by the way, there are over 200 jurisdictions in California that have a tobacco retail license. That's not nearly enough, but at least it's trending, and hopefully other jurisdictions will adopt such things so that their communities can have less tobacco sold. The other nice thing about it is that there is absolutely no cost to the taxpayer. A lot of people were upset because, a lot of people's perception is that this is something that the city of Vallejo would have to spend money on. But it's actually tobacco retailers that pay the fee that covers the enforcement of the ordinance for whatever checks on their retail sales for the year are. So it's actually revenue neutral. So it made it a lot easier to sell to the city. On top of that, the Attorney General of the state of California also was getting grants, and Vallejo actually got a grant for almost $1 million to help with the education of the retailers and for various other enforcement methods that are needed for getting this tobacco retail license passed. So there's a huge incentive for the city council to pass this. Although, unfortunately, as you'll see, it was not unanimous, but it did pass. Okay, other restrictions that our Vallejo tobacco retail license had was no sales at pharmacies. If you can believe it, the same places that sell your medicine was selling tobacco. And so a person can literally go in and buy tobacco from the same place where in a pharmacy. Now, there are only about 4 pharmacies that were doing that, including some of the big retailers. They no longer can. That reduced the number from 100 to maybe 96, and we're hoping that over time that the retailers will, the numbers of retailers will go down by attrition, that people will close their businesses or hopefully get a new business model. We definitely like what Tracy with Y was suggesting, that they consider new business models and start selling healthy items in lieu of the cigarettes and tobacco products. So the goal of the tobacco retail license is also to get that ratio down to 1 to 2,500. The new stores, when they are when we get down to 50, if someone is applying to sell tobacco in Vallejo after that point, it would still have to be 1,000 feet from youth areas, from each other. There's all kinds of restrictions as to location, so that the density that you saw on that original map would not continue to exist. And so hopefully this will disincentivize the future businesses that move to Vallejo to contribute to the blight that they have caused, and also the food business. We got a pretty high fee for the tobacco retail license. We had to fight for that too. The other important step is that we also made sure that the police were not involved. In some jurisdictions, the police department is responsible for doing these checks. Vallejo has a reputation, and they also have a very small police force because of that. We didn't want that to even be on the table. So, fortunately, the timing of the tobacco retail license in Vallejo was, at the time, the then city manager was actually civilianizing a large part of the code enforcement division. That means that police officers are not required to appear when they're enforcing these things. So we were able to get the code enforcement department, which are not badged officers, to agree to be responsible for this. And again, that resource of the city is paid for by this license. All right, so what comes next? We are, our coalition is very interested in making sure that this TRL is actually going to be enforced. We're also going to be very involved in educating the retailers on what is legal for them to sell. We will facilitate in making sure that there are checks, like I mentioned, from code enforcement, but we're also eventually hoping that we will be able to facilitate that with decoys, and not just decoys of youth who go in and try to buy tobacco, but also even having adults go in and try to use those coupons that I mentioned earlier, because those coupons are also, disallowed by the ordinance. All right, any questions on tobacco retail licenses? Hopefully that was understandable. Okay. All right. Yes, Doctor.
I'll just make one comment, which is that, I mean, first of all, I think you guys deserve a lot of credit, because getting TRLs passed from the last person to tell you is a huge lift, especially if there's any amount of opposition out there supporting the business community.
Right.
But the other thing that's really important to understand about TRLs is that they lay the groundwork for the end game, because you can come back at some point and request that your city council add a provision to the TRL to sunset out all of the licenses by a given date. So once the TRL is in place, you can make it possible, it's actually possible, to pass an ordinance that says all the TRLs will become invalid by, say, 3 years or 5 years from the date in which that amendment is made. And that is the most direct pathway to the end game of ending the sale of tobacco. And what it does is it puts the retailers on notice that they have X number of years to figure out how to get busy and make a transition to selling other products, and basically get themselves off of addiction to the revenue from tobacco products.
Yeah, I believe Burlingame has done that. They are not issuing any more tobacco retail licenses. Obviously, there's also a couple of cities you're aware of, Manhattan Beach, Beverly Hills, doesn't sell tobacco at all, and they will not. And so that is toward ending as well.
Yeah. That's the biggest leap to just pass an ordinance prohibiting the sale. But the TRL is a vehicle that allows for a transition period.
Don't forget to be Mike yourself.
Yes.
David,
You want to know that?
we are TA. And our next